Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and today is actually my 100th episode. So join me today to review some more details and commentary made by, as reportedly made by Tecumseh, which is Tecumseh, Tecumseh. It's not entirely clear what the appropriate pronunciation is. So do bear with me. It's no offense intended for those who would say that I'm incorrectly pronouncing his name. This volume, I'm working through a series of books from 1915. It's the Chronicles of Canada in 32 volumes. I have something like 29 volumes, and I'm desperately searching for volume 1, of course, the one that I was especially looking for. But today, I want to take you through, again, as I said, some more and as it says here, a chronicle of the last great leader of his people. So I'm going to be quoting from this volume, which is volume 17, I believe. And here's, and what I find so appealing about him and his strategies and what motivated him, as well as the same kinds of motivations and scenarios purported by Big Bear. They both had really clear concept of what a nation is, how vast its holdings are. And they both tried to impress upon their fellow chiefs and communities and people the importance of not losing sight of that. And so you find my message today, the same, right? You're not just your community. It's much broader than that. And in fact, by referring to these old books that are written by white men, to impress upon you how it was known and understood, and still is, and why the effort to get you to not look beyond, what you've been corralled into these small communities, to have you go no further than concepts of a treaty boundary, which I've emphasized many times is a boundary for Her Majesty, for the Crown, not interior boundaries of actually great large nations. So this opens with, this is page 2, saying, well, where is he from? His story we're to tell in this volume sprang from the Shawnees, an energetic and warlike tribe of Algonquian stock. The Algonquins, whose tribal branches were scattered from Labrador to the Rockies and from Hudson Bay to North Carolina. That's a huge area. That's the core language of the tribes. And that's why I've emphasized, Treaty 1 through 11, encompasses a fair portion of that. But to go beyond your community, go beyond the treaties, go beyond even Nahio and Anishinaabe, but recognize when you say, oh, my relations, these are all your relations. This is your nation. This is the vastness of your country that you share. And it describes how Tecumseh was not content with the narrow territory which satisfied his tribesmen. So again, this is mostly in the States, a lot of warfare, as people are primed to accept entitlement to just small portions. He would have none of that. Same with Big Bear. And it's admirable, and it's to remember that this man is respected and admired throughout history. And you go to museums in the States. I spend a lot of time in Indianapolis, and how he's depicted and respected, even though yes, he was killed in battle in the States and with the Americans, but nonetheless, he is admired for what he stood for. And here it says, for instance, his widespread reputation as a warrior was to count with telling effect in that great plan and purpose of his life, the formation of his Indian Confederacy. And what that was bringing back together the nationals of the nation. And throughout these kinds of books, it talks about, how great councils were gathered or occurred. They weren't all the time, but only when, of course, matters of national concern required it. Otherwise, you had local communities dealing with their internal local matters. It's like any concept in any society where you have governance that is composed of different levels and layers of structure. And what Tecumseh was very clear about, he says, Indian land, he said, was common property. All the chiefs had not been consulted on this particular Treaty of Greenville of 1795. They had gotten a few chiefs to sign off on it and said, okay, now we have that land, we don't need these other guys. And Tecumseh was saying, no, you don't have a valid treaty because it's all of our land and you need all of us to agree. And he says all the chiefs had not been consulted, had not agreed, and many of them would refuse to accept the loss of their lands. This was not a lawful basis upon proceeding. And it said, when he looked into the future, he saw that the red race was doomed unless a strong and united effort was made to check this aggression. That's the same situation today, isn't it? So many communities being coerced, if you will, signing off because they feel, they don't have any other choice. They may be relying on advisors who are quite frankly indoctrinated to accept this is the only way you can do things. They've been taught to do it this way, and they're repeating and being fed documents to say this is what you do. I mean, I just read a post, again, Mike Morris, thank you, of a couple of lines that's being put in BCRs, Band Council resolutions, and sent out to people, and it was uttered, gibberish, right? Completely, a complete setup to say, oh yeah, we're within Canada, and this happened somehow when we signed treaty. It's like, my goodness, right? Thank goodness someone like that can read that and say, look, what's wrong with this picture? I'm pretty sure he gets the whole picture. I could have taken, 20 minutes to, 3 pages of writing what's wrong with these 3 sentences and the implications for what they represent and what they're trying to get Chief and Council to sign. And as I mentioned, he's still admired, Tecumseh, for, being such a gifted orator, and it says the stately Algonquin language displayed its greatest beauty when spoken by him. His eloquence flowed as freely as a mighty river, or again thundering like a cataract, it swept everything along in its tempestuous tide. Tecumseh's speech can never reach our ears. We cannot see the light flash from his hazel eye or the smile play upon his bronzed cheek. We cannot watch his graceful gestures. His personal presence we may not feel, but behind his recorded words, we are still aware of living force and power. And his words speak well to me in that manner. The kinds of things being said and signed off today by so-called leaders are not going to matter at all, quite frankly. They are not going to be looked upon as inspirational. They are going to be looked upon as being weak capitulations. And people will be asking, why? Why did they do that? Why did they say those things? How could they say those things about our people? As I mentioned, he said reviewing, and here's what's pretty neat. What he did in those days and what I was first exposed to when I was a Department of Justice lawyer for the Crown, a Crown lawyer in-house for Indian Affairs. And I didn't understand it at first, but I came to understand it, is that at every meeting before we got to the business at hand, there would be an elder who would stand up and would recite through everything that had occurred to remind everyone there, these are the outstanding matters between us. And here it explained in talking about his gift of orator why it would take so long. He said, rapidly reviewing all the treaties between the Western tribes and the whites, he boldly denied the validity of the Treaty of Greenville. At the same time, he pleaded for conciliation and peace. His speech made a great impression. As that elder, and this is Takla Lake, made such an impression upon me when he was, and I was furiously, right, you can appreciate all this alleged wrongdoing, I'm furiously writing notes and trying to get it all down because I'm counting a multitude of potential, wrongdoing and allegations here, and it's my duty as a Crown lawyer, to report these things back. To my dismay, I guess someone stopped me, I'm there with Indian Affairs, they stopped me and said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm making notes for reporting this back. Don't bother, right? You don't need to, they say it all the time, and, they didn't understand or appreciate why this man was taking up all this time. And it's because of the importance of not forgetting. I don't hear that happening anymore. It's been a long time since I've been in a meeting where I've heard someone initiate and remind and start out the proceedings to say, by the way, this is still outstanding. We have not resolved this. That's how diplomacy proceeds, to say, we are dealing with this issue today, but remember, we have these outstanding matters behind us, between us. And this was just talking about the spot that he had chosen that would be central to everyone. And that's important too in deciding in those times of having to come together as a nation, the large N nation, I call, the big capital N nation. Where do you gather in those times? And again, speaking again about his aspect that this was not a valid treaty, they accused the Americans of deception, demanding that the land should be given back and that no more should be taken without the unanimous consent of all the tribes. If there's to be a capitulation, if there is to be an actual surrender, a waving of the white flag, a suing for peace and giving up all in return, it's not going to be given effect by a couple of bands. And it's not going to be given effect by those bands grouped under a numbered treaty area. It has to and can only come together with the nation as a whole. Of course, all of these documents are structured to have these people say, well, there really is no nation, we're all that's left. And that at some point, certainly back in 1982, somehow we came under Canada and somehow these things happened. Those things did not happen. They're trying to make it happen and trying to get you to make these representations that they did happen. It's all just a bogus, manufactured lie, quite frankly. And in terms of this, acting in a united way, it's important to understand that back in Tecumseh's time, that word came from Canada. Listen to this, right? Weapons were lavishly bestowed upon Tecumseh, who was encouraged to unite the tribes, but not to declare war until word came from Canada. When Canada wanted it to be effective in terms of protecting against, in war against Americans, unite by all means, right? But once the Americans are taken care of, and now we're down to the struggle, it's that saying, the enemy of my friend. But once that scenario is dealt with, you're back to who's your enemy, right? You're no longer friends at that point when you're struggling over the same piece of property instead of sharing it like the stage has been set through treaties. And he shared that, his intention of the United Tribes was to recognize the old boundary only and not these new boundaries put in by this new treaty that was not again approved by all of them. Tecumseh apparently had, as his brother did, the prophet knew, his other brother knew that, I'm just going to start that again. Tecumseh felt that the great purpose of his life was about to fail. So he had an insight that his time had come. He had been champion not only of the rights of the Indians, but of their very existence as a nation. And that is the same purpose today that I implore Indigenous Nationals to understand is at stake. Dear to his heart was the freedom of his people, and to achieve this had been his sole ambition. All the powers with which he had been endowed, his superb physical strength, his keen intellect, his powerful oratory, had been used to this one end. But he was betrayed by, Canadians pulling out, and so anyhow it continues. Tecumseh was born to command, and his proud spirit, naturally intolerant of control, chafed at following the dictates of a leader who had deceived him. So he was bitterly meditated, following the examples of other chiefs as to what to do. His courageous spirit revolted at the thought of retreat, so he carried on. He had made that commitment. He carried through his commitment, even though he knew that he was likely to meet his end, which he did. Whatever doubts were in his mind, he maintained the dignity of a warrior to the end, and endeavored to instill courage into the hearts of those about him. His last words to the Canadian leader, "Father, have a big heart." He then joined his warriors and awaited the attack. So this is a man who knew the definition of a nation. He knew the extent of the country of the nation. He worked and traveled far and wide, teaching and reminding and sharing those words. And he was a great speaker, a great orator. And it's the same issues today. There's not yet at least, though there's been talk of the Emergency Act being triggered by Prime Minister Trudeau, but the 13 premiers, etc., have said, no, we don't want that. But, generally speaking, we're not in a state of war where, Indigenous nationals will be gunned down. Some would suggest we actually are in that stage. But right now, I would put it to you that it's a legal wording war. It's a war of representation. It's a war of de facto statements. And it's a situation where Canada continues to try to undermine the standards required to evidence actual capitulation. So again, reminding you of the words of Big Bear and reminding you of the words of Tecumseh. Be the nation. Come together and act as the nation. As all these little things are being signed off, you can't actually stop and track down what's being signed, but you can make a statement and be very clear you are still nationals of the nation. Not just Indian band members, not just I'm Treaty 6, I'm Treaty 4, and I've done an episode to say, treaties didn't create you. Treaties, and there's so many treaties that are within and have been done by the nation. I encourage you to become very clear in terms of who you are and what you have and the great expanse of that is still yours, and for your decision only as to whether you will carry that great gift of the Creator, or whether you feel, because of priming, for example, unworthy to do so and wish to hand it over to Canada. Thank you for your time.